Okay, this video is called Who Wins Between America and China? And if you haven't seen it already, please watch my last video called A Day in the Life of the Average American, where I talk about how Americans are becoming overloaded with estrogen, and this is having a big effect, especially on men, women also. And American males are basically being feminized by these chemicals. And those are not just my words, those are common words, feminization and demasculination in the scientific literature on the successive exposure of Americans to Americans, male and female, but I'm sort of especially focusing on the men in this talk. And this is happening for multiple reasons. All these estrogenic chemicals in the water, in the processed food, in sunscreens, moisturizers, cosmetics, in perfumes, in colognes, etc. And it's also, there's almost like laws. It's like the Title IX in sports caused a lot of male sports to be canceled. I wrestled in college, and it was a common thing. I knew tons of college wrestlers when I was young, but more and more colleges are canceling, and they already have canceled their wrestling programs. So less guys are playing these sort of macho sports like wrestling and football. In addition, the culture has changed. It's now much less masculine. When I was a young guy, it was a cool thing for a young guy to try to be strong, to be tough. Okay, now sort of a lot of young typical male behavior gets this label of toxic masculinity. And when I was in high school back in the 1980s, it was cool to be a football player, especially. They were like the celebrities of the high school. But it was also cool to be a wrestler. They were highly respected. In a sense, football players and wrestlers, they go compete or fight for their school, if you will, and people respected that. I was quite surprised when I went to Stanford after having, gone to the Midwest, tends to be a wrestling area. I grew up in the Chicago area. And so then you go to Stanford, and there would be letters to the school newspaper, the Stanford Daily, saying, oh, we shouldn't be giving scholarships to aggressive male sports like football and wrestling. I thought, are these people crazy? But that's how it was. So that was where I first was introduced to this idea of men should not be masculine and tough and strong, And I grew up watching masculine, tough, strong guys on TV, John Wayne and all the other cowboy shows and Chuck Connors, and Father Knows Best. It was sort of a masculine society when I was a kid growing up. It's normal for young men to take pride in their physical strength. That's what they've got. They glory in it. Intellectually, they can't compete with an old guy in terms of knowledge. The old guy's got a lot more experience. But physically, young guys, they're really strong. They're bigger, stronger, more muscular. They got more time to lift weights and sleep. But they are definitely stronger. Okay, so I just also want to show you, I'm going to show you, here was my college fraternity, and this is the athlete fraternity at Stanford University. This is where John Elway, Super Bowl quarterback, Jim Plunkett, Super Bowl quarterback, went. And this is the routine thing that all the pledges had to sing. And this wouldn't even probably be allowed nowadays. But I'll just show you. This is what we had to sing, back in the 1980s. And by the way, I'll just give you some names so it'll make sense. Barnes was this big football player, this big, giant, fat guy. Probably weighed around 300 pounds, if not more. Orvik was another giant lineman on the football team. And so the song is, a bunch of jokes with their names and their sisters' names in there. And so here's how it goes. Mary Ann Barnes was the queen of all the acrobats. She could do the tricks that would give the men the shit. She could shoot green peas from a fundamental orifice, do a double somersault and catch him on her tits. She's a great big fat chick, twice the size of Orvik, with hair on her ass like the branches on a tree. She could ride rope, shoot, fuck, climb a tree, and drive a truck. That's the kind of girl who's going to marry me. We'd have to sing that over and over again. I still remember it because of that reason. But what I'm trying to say is, that was normal back then. Nobody thought twice about it. Nowadays, oh, that's so inappropriate. It was just the way guys behaved back then. Okay, estrogen overload causes apathy in men. And here's a good book. This Anthony J. Estrogeneration is a really good book for understanding an introduction to estrogen chemistry. There's more advanced textbooks that will supply the details, but to just quickly get the idea of it, this is a great book. He doesn't know anything about nutrition, but he's great on estrogen chemistry. He did a PhD in it. Okay, so one of the things he talks about is that elevated estrogen levels, especially in men, cause apathy. And there's more to it than that. There's financial reasons as well. But the number of men going to college has really dropped. And colleges nowadays, like more than 60% of the students are females. That's like sort of unheard of. It used to be there were more men than women in college. Back when I was young, most women in my neighborhoods, they didn't have jobs. They were just housewives. They took care of their families, and a lot of people say, well, isn't it great that women are working? I don't think it's, I don't want to work. I wish a woman would support me. If there's any woman out there that wants to support me so I can just write books and make intellectual videos, I would love it, okay? I would love to not have to work. The reason people work is because they have to, because they're poor. It's not like some glory. You work because you need to work, support your family, or pay your bills. So what I'm trying to say is there's this attitude. Well, aren't these women fortunate? Isn't it wonderful that they have the opportunity to work? Yeah, right. I would love to be a house husband and just sit around the house writing books, making videos. I could write the medical textbooks, rewrite them. They're all wrong. They all stink. So anyways, back when I was young, most families were married. There weren't that many divorces. The women didn't have to work typically. They would stay home, take care of their kids. There were lots of kids around too. We just play sports with kids on the block. There were so many kids around. You could just knock on a couple doors and, play, softball in the street or some other game. Nowadays, a kid wants to see their friend. It's a big play date. You got to drive them somewhere far away. Okay, getting back to that. In a sense, heterosexual men nowadays are discriminated against. Everyone else is a victim group. They're really sort of scapegoated in society, and that's not fair. In the old days, the movies would have people like Sylvester Stallone in the Rocky movies, and we all loved the Rocky movies. I can remember that back when I was in grade school. And then there was Rambo and First Blood and all the Rambo movies. And we still were watching John Wayne, Clint Eastwood, Charlton Heston, Chuck Connors, all these masculine role models. TV and the movies, they were full of them, okay? Nowadays, you don't see hardly any of that. And there was sort of this honor the ancient Greek culture. Now The Simpsons mocks the ancient Greek culture, Nowadays, men are portrayed in movies are mocked, they're disrespected. The traditional family is being destroyed. It used to be the man and the woman were typically married, and that was a typical family, okay? Nowadays, the way things are going, there's a push that people should not even be allowed to raise their own children. You think I'm kidding? Pay attention, read about it. You'll see that's what's going on. That's not good. It's almost like Plato. If you look at ancient Greek history and philosophy, Plato was very different than Aristotle. Plato had seen Athens defeated by Sparta. He was pissed off about it, and he started pushing towards this collectivist mentality to mimic Sparta. And he got to the point where they think, the children should just be bred like farm animals and not really have the right, the man and the woman, to choose each other, not really have the right to raise their children. So unfortunately, those ideas are coming back, and that's being pushed into the American population. And most people don't realize it, but that is happening. That parents will not be allowed to raise their own children in the not too distant future if things continue with the current trends. In the old days, kids often grew up on a family farm, and they were pretty knowledgeable and resilient. The kid could drive a tractor, he could hunt, he could do a lot of things, he could fix things around the farm. He had a lot of general know-how. Versus nowadays, kids, they just take Scantron tests where they memorize lists of vocabulary words and stuff like that, things that are meaningless, and they come out of high school, they don't know almost anything. And then, from this type of crappy education, all these processed foods, their culture, etc., lots of these kids have really poor cognitive abilities. A lot of them got a attention deficit where they can't read a book cover to cover on their own. They have a hard time having an attention span to learn complex things. It's not a joke. There is a problem with their cognitive function. And I actually think it's funny, Andrew Tate, who's a kickboxer, and he's not that scholarly of a guy. Kids sign up to go to his so-called school, and the first thing they're taught is how to pay attention. I mean, that's pathetic. It's how remedial is that? I mean, I feel sorry. A lot of these poor kids, they're messed up, and, you want to help them, but I'm just saying that's where things are at, where, just teaching somebody how to pay attention is like a big common thing. Weak families with no father in the house. Mothers are super important for kids. I would actually say in general, mothers tend to be more important than fathers for kids. But fathers are very, very important for kids. Mamas tend to give kids unconditional love and praise them and encourage them. And it's not necessarily fun having a father criticize you, but I think it helps you to be prepared for the real world. I used to feel like my father judged me unfairly. I got injured in the spring season of my junior year, and I wanted to take a year off from high school so I could recover from my injury, come back and win state tournament. My father forced me to go back to school even though I couldn't wrestle, and I was pissed off at him. He wouldn't let me redshirt. That's called redshirting, when you take a year off to maintain your eligibility. And I kind of needed a year of redshirting. I wanted it in college. He wouldn't let me take it either. Back in those days, you did what your father told you. It's not like nowadays a kid will tell you, no, Dad, I'm not going to do that. Back in those days, my dad told me something. Even if I didn't like it, I would do it because he's my father. That's how it was back in those days. So anyways, what I'm trying to say, though, is I a lot of times was mad at my dad because I always felt like he was always demanding more of me and not necessarily helping me to achieve those goals. Like I would take third place in a tournament, let's say in college, and he'd go, well, why didn't you win it? I'm like, well, why didn't you let me redshirt? So it used to piss me off that he would have these real high expectations of me. And, I was working as hard as I could. And, yeah, I could have done some things differently, certainly. But I sort of felt like instead of just giving me high expectations, why don't you give me some advice or find somebody who knows how to give me helpful advice? But at the same time, there was this drive. Like my dad grew up on a house with a dirt floor. And so whenever I would not be liking a class in school, let's say I don't do so well in the midterms or something, I'd be thinking, man, my dad grew up on a dirt floor, worked his butt off, and, if I don't get my act together and start working harder, I'm a wimp. I won't respect myself. So I always wanted my father to be proud of me, and, it gave me a lot of endurance. I would maybe want to goof off with some guys and go do something fun at a party for the weekend, go to the beach, with the girls or something. Nope. I'm not going to fuck up. I want to do well in school. I would just study all day long on a Saturday and Sunday. And that was pretty routine that I was like that. And in my mind's eye, there was always, my father did this. He was boxing champion of the United Kingdom, and he, got a valedictorian scholarship to college. He grew up on a dirt floor, and I was always like, my mom's family was really educated too. But when I was growing up, it was my father was my academic role model. And what I'm trying to say is that role model sort of in my thoughts always made me work hard. It would be completely unacceptable to me to ever have not tried as hard as I could and have to face my father. I would not psychologically be able to do that. Nowadays, the public schools teach kids to be atheists, to reject the values and religions of their parents. This weakens kids. People are stronger when they're religious. It adds resilience and psychological power to a person to have that type of religious metaphysics in their mind. Church tax exemptions, basically they cause a removal of free speech from the church, and they make church boring so people don't want to go to church. China is exporting lots of opioids to America. And, it seems to me like China's doing this because they want to weaken the young men of America. And maybe also, in a sense, they're turning the tables. Back in the 1800s, England used to sell opium to the Chinese as a way to weaken their population. So now they're doing the same thing to America. China is weakening the American population. And that, I think, is not a joke, okay? The families are being broken up by all these crazy cultural rules nowadays. And, breaking up the families and the churches is exactly what China wants to happen to America. It's like a divide and conquer strategy that the Roman Empire used to use on the Italian cities and other countries in their vicinity around the Mediterranean so that they could easily conquer them, okay? And it reminds me of a quote from the Bible here. This is Matthew chapter 12, verse 25 to 27. Here it is. If a kingdom is divided against itself, it cannot stand. If a house is divided against itself, it cannot stand. No one can enter a strong man's house to steal his possessions unless he first ties up the strong man. Then he can plunder his house. Okay, Matthew chapter 12, verse 25, 27. So what I'm basically saying is China's doing that through a combination of China selling opioids and other cultural things and this estrogen overload and pop culture, pushing this toxic masculinity routine onto young men and discriminating against young men. Basically, the young man, the strong young man of our society, the guys who protect us, they're being, in a sense, tied up, weakening America. China has more than four times as many men as America. Their budget has been going up. Our budget has been going down. So you have to ask yourself, is China going to conquer the United States in the future? I'm worried about it, and are they going to, force us into their version of communism, which is basically the modern version of slavery? Hopefully that will not happen. Hopefully, America will get its estrogen levels under control and its psychology and its philosophy and its religion attitudes in better shape. I hope so, because, my view of America from what I've seen since the 1970s, it's going down. It's becoming poor. It's becoming much less religious. And it has a lot of other problems. And these are fixable problems, but I don't see them getting fixed. So I hope America makes a good comeback.